Hello there, YouTube. Now, Devin here again. Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite rifles. Now, I'm also a little biased towards it, but one of my favorite rifles nonetheless. Now, a lot of people really like this rifle, and there's probably just as many people, if not more, that absolutely hate this rifle. And that rifle would be the Mosin Nagant. Alright, now the Mosin Nagant holds a special place in my heart because, for one, they have a really storied history behind them. This is actually the only Mosin I own anymore, and I love this Mosin because it started its life as a French Mosin made for Russia before World War I, way back in the 1890s. It was then, at some point, in World War I, captured by the Austrians, by the fact that it's marked with the Austrian little thing here up on the receiver. And then it was sold after World War I to, as with a lot of the fact, because Austria-Hungary during World War I captured a ton of Mosins, sold to Finland in probably at some point in the 20s, and where they retrofitted it in 1944 into this, the M39. So this rifle has a huge story behind it because it was made in France, served in Russia, was captured by Austria, pressed into Austrian service, and then sold to Finland, where it then went to go fight the Russians. So it's just a neat piece of history, and a lot of the Mosins, that's not an uncommon story to find with a lot of them. There's tons of different variations of Mosins you can collect out there, and the reason they used to be looked really down upon when they were cheap. And they actually still are one of the cheapest military surplus rifles out there you can buy. For the fact that a lot of people really don't like them. Now, they don't like them because most of them aren't as nice as this one, for one. And for two, they tend to be rather loud. The bolts tend to be less than nice on them. This one isn't so bad. The spring in this one that you have to fight when you cam it is really tough in this one. So, yeah, that firing pin spring in there is quite bad, but I'm arguing that the Mosin is good for a couple of reasons. I like it as a collector for the history, which is reason number one. Reason number two, it's probably the cheapest military surplus rifle to shoot that isn't really still in use. I mean, so like cheapest like World War rifle to shoot, because 7.62x54R is very cheap. If you know where to look, you can get huge sums of ammo for very cheap. Pennies per round, basically. And that price is going up, and it also depends on where you live and your taxes and stuff like that. But ammo is still, if you wanted to go buy like regular ammo for these, it's not uncommon to find a box for $10. That's not really so bad, and that's even you could find some cheaper than that. Modern day made ammo. They don't have the best action. They're not the most ergonomic, and they have some different weird little flukes with them. Like a lot of the older ones were sighted at the factory with the bayonet. So if you don't get the bayonet that is serial to your rifle, they don't shoot super accurate at really long range. But if you do have a bayonet that fits yours, it shoots really good at long range. And that's something that a lot of people don't seem to realize, is that a lot of them were sighted with the bayonet. So that's why a lot of people misconstrue the fact that they are inaccurate. They can perform quite decently, whereas if you look at this finish example here, it was sighted without its bayonet, and it has a much heavier barrel. This is probably the epitome of the Mosin action. I've said it before in my previous video, the closest thing you can get to polishing a turd possible in the firearms world really is this right here, the Mosin Nagant, because there is a lot of problems with the Mosin Nagant. So, and I'm saying that as somebody who truly deeply loves the Mosin Nagant. There was one guy, well, I've actually got multiple comments. I'm not picking out one person. One person that I said, well, I'm arguing that the Mosin is one of the best military surplus rifles out there because, for one, it's cheap to shoot. You can get lots of enjoyment out of them. There's lots of versions of them to collect, and they were, and still are, as compared to other surplus rifles, cheap. And they were all telling me blah, 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 this and that, and I was arguing that, what makes a Mosin cheap is, all of the, basically comes down to one factor, because everyone's like, well, the Mosin's not better than the Mauser, blah, 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 blah. And he was listing all the stuff why this Mauser was better. A couple people have blah, 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 this and that, the Mauser, blah, 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 this and better, you know. And yes, and I'm like, well, yeah, duh. The Mauser is probably a more user-friendly option as far as buying a surplus rifle goes, but it still comes down to one thing. So the reason why the Mosin is cheap, and a lot of people can't seem to understand why the Mosin is cheap. A lot of collectors think, like I said, because they're garbage. They're made very crude, and their action is terrible, and they're inaccurate. And I'm like, well, actually, there are plenty of Mosins out there who form just as well, if not better, than Mauser 98s, and there's Mauser 98s that perform better than a lot of Mosin Nagants, and so every rifle can be better for someone, or your range of skills or whatnot. There's lots of Mosins out there that shoot fantastic, and there's lots of Mauser 98s out there that shoot fantastic. So why is the Mosin truly cheap? Well, a lot of it boils down to a couple of factors, and it's pretty simple when you look at the numbers, and that's what we're going to do. So now if you look at Mauser 98s, okay? Just Mauser 98 actions, variations of it, okay? Used by the militaries, Total Mauser 98 actions used by all militaries across the world number about 23 million, okay? Give or take. That's just a rough rounded number, 23 million, okay? It's a lot of rifles, all right? But some of them are in different calibers and blah, 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 different configurations, and not everything's, super whatever, whereas most of the Mosin Nagants are made on the same machinery or copies of the same machinery, so they have a lot of parts interchangeability, and they were made in a lot of countries that were very close together. They're made with a lot of the same metallurgy, and you can take a bolt out of an 1891 Russian, made Mosin, even though I don't think very many, if any, were made in 1891. Yeah, I think actually none of them were made in 1891. So I don't think they started coming off the assembly line until about a year later. So take a really early Mosin Nagant bolt. You can take that 1800s Mosin Nagant bolt, okay? And like this one, for example, you could take this 1800s Mosin Nagant bolt right here, and you could slap this into one made in the 50s, and it'll work just fine. No problems whatsoever. Now, you could do that with a lot of Mauser 98s too, but there's also a lot of other parts on a Mosin you can do this with. And a lot of people, look at that as a reason why they're cheap, because there's so many parts out there. So now, number of Mosins made by militaries across the world, okay? 37 million. That's almost double Mauser 98s. That's why they're so cheap. It comes down to numbers. There is much more parts and whole rifles, Mosin Nagants out there, than there ever have been Mauser 98s, okay? And that's why the Mosin is cheap. It boils down to something that simple. It's not because it's a worse rifle. It's not because it's a better rifle. It's not because, it does one thing better or one thing worse than the Mauser, all right? They made more of them. For every Mauser rifle made since, 1898, okay? Every Mauser 98 made since 1898, okay, that served with a military and was made by a military or for a military, the Soviet bloc and the Russians and the Chinese made 2. So every country that ever used a variation of the Mauser 98, every country that had one made or used one in the military, all right, ever made one or bought one or used one, the Soviet bloc made 2. That's why they're cheap, okay? It's that simple. And it's a, excellent rifle for people who are just learning how to shoot. They're, like I said, they're cheap to shoot. They're excellent plinking rifles. They're fun if you're just going out to just shoot for the fun of shooting. Nothing fancy, nothing major, it's a neat rifle, and parts are really easy to find for them. For relatively cheap still compared to other surplus rifles. And people, I think, give the Mosin too much, they're too hard on it for whatever reason. I don't know why. I love the Mosin. I love the history behind the action. Now, I'm not saying it's a good rifle, all right? Because I know as somebody who does shoot quite frequently, I know it's not a good rifle, okay? I like it though. I love the Mosin. As a historian, I love this Mosin, and as a shooter, I love the Mosin. Okay, but I also see why a lot of people hate them and don't like them. So hopefully you learned something from this video, even if it was just some numbers here and there. So, and once again, those numbers are rounded. So don't be coming back at me in the comments with blah 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 this or that with numbers made. That's rounded numbers, okay? So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and you like this sort of thing. I'm just, clearing up some of the little problems you see in history and, some of the little bit of variation. So if you guys are interested in starting a military surplus collection as far as rifles go, there's plenty of Mosins out there and they need good homes. So people, make sure you take care of them. They store quite well. Most of them you can find still have cosmoline on them from probably 50, 60 years ago. The only things you really need to watch on them is the bolts, because the bolts are all in the white, so those need to be taken care of a little bit more to prevent rust than the other parts of the rifle, but they are all fantastic rifles. So in the end, and it'll bring you a lot of enjoyment, even though you might not be able to hit crap with it, because you might get a fluke one. So, but hopefully you got it for cheap. So thank you so much for watching, you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you enjoyed seeing the Mosin Nagant again here on the channel. It's one of my actually better shooting surplus rifles, so love it to death. The good old Finnish M39. So thank you so much for watching, guys, and hopefully I will get to see you in the next video. Bye.